Long story short, so I was after my clerkship, I was going to go work for a big firm. I was going to, I'd gone into law to make a lot of money, and I'd gotten a number of job offers with a UFC law degree and a clerkship. I could go to really any city I wanted to and work for a number of big firms. Before I was going to do that, though, I was going to take some time to travel. And so I ended up riding my bicycle from Denver, Colorado, San Diego, California to Miami, Florida. So 3 months, 3 days.
Oh, my days,
bicycle.
really?
Oh, my goodness.
So you went backwards, then went to the...
Yes, which was the logic of a 26-year-old.
Yeah, so let's go further.
Yeah. Well, at the time, I was living in Denver. I didn't know anybody in San Diego. And I was like, I don't know, am I going to get my bike there? I was like, just bike there and turn around. That was literally the logic.
Welcome to Foreword, a TEDS faculty podcast. I'm Madison Pierce.
And I'm Fellipe de Vale.
Today we have the pleasure of hosting Cliff Nellis, who is Executive Director of Lawndale Christian Law Center, which is in a neighborhood west of Chicago on the west side. This is a practice that provides zealous, holistic criminal defense free of charge exclusively to the youth of North Lawndale. We're really excited to learn more about this ministry. Cliff holds a BA in philosophy and English from Illinois Wesleyan, a law degree from University of Chicago, and is working toward an MBA at the Booth School of Business at University of Chicago also. But best of all, at least from our perspective, he has an MDiv from TEDS. So it's a privilege to have you here with us, Cliff.
Thanks for having me.
Well, for listeners who might be unfamiliar with you and your work in Lawndale, could you maybe tell us a little bit about it? Could you describe what you do and what the others at the Lawndale Christian Law Center do as well?
Sure. So we call it holistic community-based defense. We are criminal defense lawyers that work on a holistic team with case managers, outreach workers, circle keepers, and wraparound supports. But on a big picture level, it's really the vision from the beginning was to meet both the legal and social needs of young people under 25 in the North Lawndale community.
Oh, interesting.
So all young people who are getting in contact with the criminal justice system through policing, courts, or through probation, parole, or incarceration are eligible for our services that are under 25. And we basically put together an integrated legal social service package of services for them to help them navigate the system and hopefully never return to it again.
Could you say a little bit more about what those kind of comprehensive packages look like?
Yeah, sure. So, it started out with me. It was a staff of one, and I was the only lawyer, only staff member. And over the years, we developed a model where we added first staff component we added to it was what we call case managers, social workers, but people who typically have a BSW, MSW, a little more clinical background. They're doing social assessments. And, I was a youth pastor before, coming into doing the legal center. So, to me, it was just building relationships with kids and families and supporting them, right?
That's great.
But it's kind of understanding what's going on at home, what's going on in the block, what's going on in the community, what's going on at school, and, how do we make sure that they have the supports that they need to succeed in life, really. But then also, while at the same time, of course, representing them in court. So our case managers do that clinical piece. The next component we brought on, and this was, I don't know how many of the founding board of directors, 100% were residents of North Lawndale. By our bylaws, 51% will always be residents of North Lawndale. And at the time, I moved into North Lawndale. So I still live in North Lawndale. I don't know how many of us predicted, I don't think anybody predicted what would happened, which is from day one to present day for the last 12 years, we have brought in by just demand. I mean, just people who walk in, very high need, young people who are really have a lot of significant challenges going on in their life, pretty heavily connected to the streets, and that's their predominant sense of community and support, and so with that came very serious legal cases and then also very serious social needs.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that we learned very early on was adding outreach workers, which is the term most people use. Street outreach workers, violence interrupters, sometimes they're called. But guys who used to be on the streets, that are no longer on the streets. We staff a team of those usually young men, but they're not young. Actually, it's funny. If any of my outreach workers were listening, they'd be like, young? Formerly street-involved people, I'll just say that.
Yeah.
But they understand our kids' lives. They've been there, they've done that. They also are still connected to the streets through family and friendships and relationships. They still live in the neighborhood. And so they can help us help us and our young person and their family navigate some of the, more serious challenges in the neighborhood around violence and conflicts that are going on in the community.
Wow.
How did you develop a passion for this? So you were a youth pastor and then...
Yeah. Well, so I grew up in Lake Zurich, which is a northwest suburb of Chicago. It's not far from here. And had very little faith background. I wasn't really raised in the church, so to speak, I wouldn't say.
Yeah.
My grandmother was the one that got me into church most of the time, and I had a great deal of respect for her. So went to college, became an atheist, went to law school, went from college to law school, and then I clerked for a federal judge out in Denver, Colorado, and was an atheist the whole time.
Wow.
And didn't read the Bible, didn't go to church, et cetera. Of course, what an atheist would do. And my older brother, my only sibling, became a Christian. I always like to say he was an obnoxious one because he was like just Jesus Bible all the time. And he was also an atheist too. He was. And I was like, dude, what happened to you? I was like, I'm happy for you. You seem happy. But like, what? Come on. Like, you know me. Like, what are you doing? You know? And but through him pestering me, I decided to, I actually decided to debate him. I was like, fine, I've gone down this road.
Older brother stuff, right? Debate. Right. Settle with the debate.
That's right. I'll take this on, buddy. And through that exchange, I think God started working on my heart, started revealing to me that my grandmother was who she was because of her faith in Christ. That was like what molded her to become the woman that I knew and loved. Yeah. And honestly, once God made that connection, I was clerking for a federal judge in Denver, Colorado. I got up at lunch, went straight to the local bookstore, got my first NIV Bible, never really read it before. I turned to Romans of all book and, Paul, was he a lawyer? He was a teacher of the law. He's an expert in the law. It's a little bit different. It was social, political, religious. I don't, what is the Old Testament law? But I don't know. But I read it fresh, and I was like, "There's a lawyer that wrote the Bible." I was like, "I'm on this,"
It's amazing.
I love it.
So I started reading the book of Romans of all places to begin with, and Romans 12:2 was my conversion verse. Do not conform any longer to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And
amazing.
I thought of myself as a fairly non-conformist person. And then I kind of looked at my life. I was like, money, prestige, and partying and pursuit of women were probably like the top 3 goals I had in life. Yeah. Wow. You know what I mean? In that order, or all tied for first. And so I was like, wow, that's, not as non-conformist as I thought. Anyway, long story short, so I was, after my clerkship, I was going to go work for a big firm. I was going to, I'd gone into law to make a lot of money. And I'd gotten a number of job offers with a UFC law degree and a clerkship. I could go to really any city I wanted to and work for a number of big firms. Before I was going to do that, though, I was going to take some time to travel. And so I ended up riding my bicycle from Denver, Colorado, San Diego, California to Miami, Florida. So 3 months, 3 days.
Oh, my days,
bicycle.
really?
Oh, my goodness.
So you went backwards, then went to the...
Yes, which was the logic of a 26-year-old.
Yeah, so let's go further.
Yeah. Well, at the time, I was living in Denver. I didn't know anybody in San Diego. And I was like, I don't know, am I going to get my bike there? I was like, just bike there and turn around. That was literally the logic.
There you go. San Diego to Miami.
Wow.
Yeah, and I ended up, 3 days before that trip, I decided to bring the Bible with me. It wasn't going to be a spiritual experience. It was all because my brother, it was the summer and spring before that trip, I left in August, that he started, proselytizing me. Now I look at it, I know what he was doing. Yeah. But decided to bring the Bible with me. And then I had just an amazing, powerful conversion. I mean, it was, it's a time of my life that I'll look back on for the rest of my life. I mean, I often tell people about it. Like, I remember biking across Western Texas where there's nothing. I mean, like,
oh my
there's
days.
nothing
You
in Western
biked
Texas.
through that?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
It was, I couldn't do it today. I'm glad I did it. Wouldn't do it again. But I remember feeling like God was so close to me that I could whisper to him on my shoulder. I mean, I'd never experienced such a powerful love and transformation and peace. And so I felt called to ministry, had no idea what it meant. Literally, I hadn't been to church for 10 plus years. And even then, when I went to church, it was not because it was part of like our home life or family life. Yeah. And so I go back to the church that my grandmother went to and sat down with the pastor, who I'm still friends with now, and I said, what do you do? I think I'm supposed to do it. Because I was like, what do you do Monday through Saturday? So you got something going Sunday morning, but what else? Right? It's like, you're just kicking it, It's like, sign me up.
That's incredible.
And it turns out that her late husband was the founder of LaSalle Street Church downtown,
Yeah.
which started Cabrini Green Legal Aid.
Yeah.
And Cabrini, so she had connections to Cabrini Green Legal Aid. She said, you're University of Chicago law grad, you should practice law. And I was like, no, you didn't hear me. I'm called to ministry. She's like, no, you didn't hear me. You should practice law.
Wow.
It took me a few years before I connected it. I didn't, at the time I was biblically illiterate and I felt like I needed an education to know because my life was turning upside down, pretty radically. And I was stepping out of the boat for sure, but I didn't really know what I was doing. I just felt led and called and sensed a piece about it, but I was like, okay, I need to attach some knowledge to this, So I went to seminary school here, obviously. Yeah. And then it was, I'm trying to think, it was during seminary that I came across Lawndale Community Church.
Okay.
I think it was 2005. I was youth pastoring at a local church in Long Grove, and my mentor there had come across Coach, the one who founded Lawndale Community Church. Yeah. And he wrote a book. And he heard him speak, and he said, Cliff, you'd really like this guy. You should check out his book. And I don't know, the book's called Real Hope in Chicago. I don't know if you've heard it. It's a pretty amazing story. In fact, I thought it was too good to be true. I read the book in 2005. He wrote it in 1995.
Wow.
So everything that he wrote about had grown for 10 years. Wow. And what he wrote about in 1995, I thought was too good to be true, such that I called the church and I was like, okay, I gotta look at this for myself. I don't believe it. Yeah. And went to Lawndale, looked around, and everything. The health center now, it's 500 employees. It's got, I think, 6 sites around Chicago, 1 in Afghanistan. They're
my days.
It's unbelievable, and the development corporation is doing, I don't remember how many units of housing and affordable housing in the neighborhood. But what's compelling, there's a lot of compelling things about the story in the church, but it was started by a group of high school kids and a school teacher coach. Yeah. And they all got together and said, well, if Jesus said to love your neighbor as yourself, doesn't that mean to love your neighborhood? So they brought the neighborhood together. They brought moms and families together and say, hey, what do you need? How can we serve you? That was sort of the foundational value that this church was created on. Yeah. So we don't have like a real, we don't have a sanctuary. Out of that first community meeting, it was a safe place to play basketball, affordable housing, healthcare, jobs, legal services. That was the 5 things. Wow. And so they started with basketball. Okay, they created a gym. That's where we hold church this day. We converted every Sunday into church, which I respect about the way the church is. Obviously I respect. I moved to the neighborhood in 2009. I could say I bought into it. Yeah. But they could have done all kinds of capital campaigns and things to build another church building or this, Bible, for a Bible study or something, which we do, but not, instead we do community centers and stuff like that, or start a legal center. How many churches would pay for criminal defense representation?
Oh my gosh.
Not
more
many.
than should.
Listen, I always say if Jesus were a lawyer, he'd work for the Lawndale Christian Legal Center, of course.
Oh, yeah.
Well, he would have founded it. I would work for him. Yeah. Or he'd be a public defender. Yeah. honestly, we should be all about redemption and grace and forgiveness and second chances.
Absolutely. Goodness, I love that. I love your story. Yeah. There's a lot of interesting wrinkles and turns, and that's really cool. Not to mention that you're standing in good stead with loads of Christians in history who are either former lawyers or on the path of becoming lawyers, like John Calvin, for instance. So you're the next John Calvin.
I don't know what we'll see.
But one of the things that I found so amazing when I was looking over the things that you do at LCLC is your commitment to restorative justice. And it seemed like a particular kind of emphasis. So maybe could you say a word or two about what restorative justice is, how it differs from different approaches to justice, and how you enact that with your practice and with everything else that's going on?
Sure. Yeah. So I would say our current system, to contrast it, what it is not, is centered around laws and punishments, right? You have a law, and with it comes a class of a sentence, class X felony, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then misdemeanors A, B, and C. And they are sentencing ranges. That's, it's do this, get this, right? Restorative justice looks at the world from a relational point of view. I think it's quite biblical. I don't think its origins are necessarily in the Christian church, but it is an indigenous practice where it looks at a community and says that there's been a broken relationship, right? Crime at the end of the day is committing harm to somebody. And so you're looking at, instead of, this being a class 2 felony with 3 to 7 years that carry with it, this was harm done to a specific person, a family, and a community that was affected by your actions. And so restorative justice processes are about healing harm. It's about bringing the people who are impacted together to go through. So the fourth component of staff that we ended up hiring, and we're hoping to scale up in 2022 because of a new law that was passed, is restorative justice circle keepers. So those are people. I'm trained myself. I don't. I'm just an executive director these days, so I don't have time. I don't get to do that anymore. But it's people who are trained to take victims and defendants and affected community members together through a healing process. Starts with some one-on-one relationship building. Then you come together in a circle and you build. You do little storytelling. You build some relationships. You get to know each other. Then you define your values, your guidelines for how you are going to conduct yourself. And then you create a space for people to share, one, the defendant takes responsibility, apologizes and explains what was going on, what happened that day or what was going on. Victim gets to hear that, which in and of itself is healing. Because lots of times it's the unknowns, like why did you?
Why this?
Why did you get my house? Why did you break into my house? Are you coming back? What was is it personal? Was it, what's the story?
Yeah. Wow.
But then at the end of the circle, everybody talks about what they need to become whole. Like, how do we become healed and stronger through this? It's very powerful. Our current system has there's no capacity in our current system for doing this. Well, I shouldn't say that, actually. We started the first restorative justice community court in the country in 2017 in North Lawndale with the Circuit Court of Cook County with Chief Judge Timothy Evans.
Wow.
So that other than that court, though, there really isn't a capacity at the system as a whole to do this.
Wow.
And so we call it a repair of harm agreement, a healing covenant, whatever you want to call it. But it comes to this conclusion of like, what does everybody need to become whole? Yeah. And then there's a follow-up process that, where everybody's supported through that process. So if it's, for example, we had a young man who robbed a pizza delivery guy. This is a violent crime. Yeah. Most people would not think this would be applicable in this situation, but about 5 guys jumped a pizza guy, took him down on the ground, roughed him up, took $600 out of his pocket. It's a class 2 felony. It's 37 years. It's, you're not likely to get probation on that. And we did a circle with the pizza delivery guy, the store owner, of course, the young man that I represented, his mother, 2 circle keepers, myself, and some affected community members. And it was, what ended up happening with that healing covenant was he built a relationship with the store owner, with the pizza delivery guy, went over, volunteered hours to clean up the store, went on deliveries with the pizza delivery guy. But then I would say and he also got trained in circles to be able to do circles for other people. But the most powerful thing was his mother. His mother was in this circle and said that his 2 younger sisters who really looked up to him were processing the fact that he wasn't sentenced to jail, but he was in jail pending trial because he couldn't afford his bond. Yeah. And so they were processing the fact that this older brother that they look up to was in jail and, collaring and doing things that children would do to express their emotions. And, now there's not a dry in the room. We're all crying because she's crying. She's talking about her family. And so one of the things that came out of that circle was to do another circle just for their family. So he could sit and heal harm with his younger sisters. Yeah. So when you compare restorative justice to our current system or punitive justice or traditional justice, whatever you want to call it, is not even, it's a whole different way of doing things.
Absolutely.
And it's, obviously we believe, and I think we've proven over the last 12 years that it's far better result. And, from a justice point of view to a community point of view to a public policy and how much money we spend on our criminal justice system, and we can save taxpayers' point of view on all of them.
Yeah.
So,
do you have some statistics about the likelihood that people will be repeat offenders having participated in this? Is there a much lower rate of?
So there's 3 evaluations I can point to. One, we're leading a randomized control trial evaluation between our office and the local public defender's office. Yeah. Because that's sort of like our equivalent, right? They have lawyers that are free, but they're not in the community and they're not on a holistic team, right? Yeah. And so we're doing University of Chicago, Inclusive Economy Lab is leading a randomized control trial evaluation. We're still midstream of that, so results haven't been published. We did the Restorative Justice Community Court I talked about, we launched in 2017, and COVID set it back a little bit because a lot of courts were shut down for a while. But, and I can't remember the exact statistic, but it was like 83% successful, which is, and this is a particular process where once they're done, they don't go to jail and they don't have a felony record. So they go through this healing process and they don't go to jail. They don't have a felony hanging over their head for the rest of their life. And they're connected to community-based supports. As part of the healing covenant is always also what does the defendant need, right? Yeah. It's not just what the victim, but I would say 99% of the people we've represented over the last 12 years, like it's, you can look at their lives and you can see why they are where they are. It's not bad people. They've been dealing with some really bad situations and they're trying to make the best of a bad situation. And so if you can address some of those needs, not many kids really want to be out on the streets, so. Right. And then the last thing I will say is on statistics. So we had this published on our website. We took it down because I thought it was a little misleading. Our 2019, I think it was 91% in rearrest, recidivate. And this is our program overall, not just the RJCC, not this RCT we're running, but just aggregately for that year. And it's actually a fact. It's a true number, but it's a true number for the duration that we had those kids, which was probably on average about a year and a half. Okay. And don't get me wrong, that's like 91% is way better than any average for 1 year, a year and a half. But it made it seem like our aggregate recidivism rate was 9%. Yeah. Which I'm sure it's not, because at year 2, year 3, year 4, year 5, and year 10, there's some people that are going to be falling back in. Yeah. So we don't have, what we need to do is come up with probably like 1, 3, 5, 10. Like what's our recidivism rate versus what is our current system producing? What I know for sure is it's better. I just don't know the magnitude. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, it sounds like a beautiful system. I think that so you talked about making people whole. And so in addition to this aspect of restorative justice, you're also committed to addressing injustice generally. So that would be racial, economic injustice. And I wonder, how do you address those kinds of injustice, and why is that so important for you?
Yeah, well, I mean, so I grew up in Lake Zurich, right? Yeah. White suburb. Went to Trinity here, which I don't know what its demographic is today, but when I was here was not diverse from at least a local population. I mean, I know we had international students that had a diversity, but I've been in college, Illinois Wesleyan University. I mean, I was just looking at my fraternity photo the other day. I was like, wow, very, very white, And I mean, I've just been in very white spaces my whole life until I moved in North Lawndale. Yeah. And as much as my bicycle trip and coming to know the Lord turned my life upside down and changed the trajectory of my life, I will say, if you were to say vertically, right, socially, horizontally, moving to North Lawndale and living life there where I've now lived for 12 years and representing kids in the criminal justice system was an equally upending, world turning upside down kind of experience on the social side. Yeah. And so when it comes to racial equity, racial injustice or justice, it's everything. I mean, we can't talk about where we're at in North Lawndale without looking at the decades and centuries of intentional systemic oppression that occurred across every sector of society. Yeah. And it's not slavery, it's not Jim Crow, it's 70s and 80s redlining practices that, prevented people from having generational wealth. It's the boom in our criminal justice system from the war on drugs. It's the 869 officers out of the 11th and 10th district today that are policing basically 3 communities, East Garfield Park, Lawndale, and Little Village. Wow. That's a lot of police. Yeah. It's a lot of police. Yeah. And it's billions of dollars, literally billions annually we're spending on it. And that's just police. We spend $2.7 billion on police. It's nuts. And then you add all the costs to prosecute in courts, prosecution, the pub defender, judge, clerk, sheriffs, then the local jail, and then probation, parole, and state incarceration. Then you do the whole thing again for federal police, federal courts. Yeah. It's billions annually, locally, just even in Chicago and Cook County, spending billions every year. Wow. And it's not getting us anything by way of public safety. I mean, obviously, look in the news. Yeah. Nothing's changed. And so I point that out because, if we had half the budget, we had a tenth of the budget, we could do magic with a restorative model that's grassroots, community led, and actually bringing resources into communities that have been really systemically disadvantaged for decades. Because you're making up ground from, you have families that have been disinvested in for generations.
Yeah.
And we got to reverse that.
Mm-hmm. Amen.
Oh, that's remarkable. I was really struck with how you described your experience familiarizing yourself with the Lawndale community and how that was equally transformative, even if on different planes, but still remarkably transformative. And it occurs to me that you bring this unique skill set to your community. You have a seminary degree, you have a law degree, you're familiar with church settings, you live in the context that you're serving, you know the stories, and you're working with people who lived the stories themselves. How do you see, your Christian faith, your work in the community, etc., your legal work, how do they intersect? Yeah. And for those who maybe, can't go out and get a law degree and things like that, how can we cultivate similar kinds of eyes to see the things that you see, or see things in the way that you have seen them?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, the first question I would say, I think anybody who feels called to ministry, it's not an intersection. It's just who I am and what I'm called to do. Right. Sure. I mean, it's not a job. It's more of it's my life. Yeah. Obviously my children and, family come first, but it's, it's like not really like it's not a job.
I live there too.
It's not a job. Yeah. I'm raising my children there. Yeah. And so on the, how to integrate the church and justice. I mean, I don't see those as two separate things at all. In fact, I would kind of tend to argue more, if you're not really doing the work of justice, then you may actually not be a part of the church, the real church. Because, if you're, I think the Bible's just riddled with examples of people who knew scripture very well, were very quote unquote pious people, and, experts in the law and experts in all things scripture, but yet we're not doing anything that, Jesus was about. And quite frankly, it's a pretty hard remarks for them, right?
Yeah.
The Pharisees, Sadducees, they're not doing too well in scripture, and so, and then you look at the people he did hang out with, and they were the marginalized. I mean, they're the outcasts in society. They were lower class, uneducated. They were, lepers and prostitutes, and, and I don't think that, that takes a whole different kind of perspective when now you're living in a community of marginalized people, right? And not having ever been exposed to that my entire life. Yeah. I was under the delusion that, my life was representative of everybody's shot in America,
right. That's
and that's just not true. Right. It's just not even close to true. It's almost bananas to think that's even true. I mean, it is bananas, but that's a lot of white people. My family still lives not just down the street from here. We don't agree on everything these days. Sure. And I think there's a shift. I will say, I think the murder of George Floyd actually has catalyzed something. I don't know if it's a movement or a moment, but I think it's that, and the fact that everybody had to sit down because of COVID. I don't think they just rushed over that video.
Yeah.
They actually had to sit with it, because honestly, there's been worse. I don't know, worse. They're all had gradients of murder, but that video was, I don't think, as bad as Tamir Rice's. That's unbelievable to me. There's a lot of people who have been killed. It's wow, why didn't that catalyze the movement? Right. But I always assume it's because COVID. Everybody had to actually sit, you're not in the hustle and bustle of taking kids that, everywhere you go. And people had to sit down and reconcile themselves with it. So I've been doing that for 12 years. I'd probably do it the rest of my life. I'm reconciling with the upbringing I had, the privileges and opportunities that were just handed to me, just by way of birth, and where I was, social position in life and in community. And now where I'm at now, and it's very different playing fields, very, very different playing fields. So we want to balance those playing fields, right?
Absolutely.
We want to bring resources so that really everybody has a fair shot.
Yeah.
And you are, right? That's the amazing thing.
We're working on it. It's, there's a lot of work to be done. I mean, we've made a splash, in 12 years, we're pushing 60 staff now, and budget went from 30,000 to 5 million. So we're starting to make a dent, but there's a lot of work to be done. There's a lot of work to be done.
Of course.
Yeah.
So.
For those who are listening who haven't yet done that work or made that same kind of commitment, what are some things that they can do, or do you have recommendations for them about how they can learn or can have their minds kind of open to the work of justice and its relationship with the gospel, really?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think part of it starts with being open, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, that was actually a class I took here that was really good for me before I moved to North Lawndale. It was cross-cultural ministry. I can't remember the professor, but he
Dr.
wrote
Cha?
No, it wasn't. He wasn't here yet. He wasn't here yet.
Okay.
It was, man, I can't remember. He wrote a book called Cross-Cultural Ministry. And he basically, he showed how like, who?
Craig Ott?
Maybe.
He's very tall.
I don't think it was. I don't know. I don't think it was him.
Okay.
I can't remember now, but I'll find the book. Yeah. I'll email you guys.
Yeah, please.
So, but it basically was like in a study had done where if you bring people from any two cultures across the world, doesn't, any of them, you're going to have conflict along 6 different areas, like time versus task, people versus event, or people versus task, time versus event, different kind of orientations and culture. Yeah. And so, but the big picture was like suspend judgment, be open, right? So like I would say first thing is like suspend judgment. As a white guy from Lake Zurich, I have been enculturated in white culture in America with all the things and the assumptions about life and pulling yourself up by the bootstraps and working hard and blah, 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 blah. You got all this stuff that, like you got to be open. You got to be open to challenge everything you thought was true.
Yeah. Are you a Ted Lasso fan by any chance?
Who?
Ted Lasso, the TV show?
No.
I was a gamble. It was a shot.
I actually don't even watch TV.
That's all right. He's got a line where he says, "Be curious, not judgmental." It reminded me a lot of what you're saying.
Yeah, I think that's a good start. Then after there, I would say, there's a lot of good books. I mean, Brian Stevenson's done some great work. Of course, the movie just came out, Just Mercy. I would say go visit EJI in Montgomery. He's got a museum there from, what's it called? From slavery to mass incarceration. It's an experiential museum. It will move you. I went there for, they also have this National Monument for Peace and Change or some Peace and Justice. And they did this coordinated project where it was very moving. Went with a Sojourners group, and they had documented through historical societies the locations of lynchings all across the South. And they had groups of people that were wanting to participate to go to those sites, gather soil, put it in a jar with their names of the people lynched there, and hold a memorial service, like in honor of their life.
Wow.
And then they bring that jar back and they put it and so there's now like a room with just jars. Right?
Oh my goodness.
And then the National Monument for Peace and Change is slabs of concrete, similarly marking sites, I think, of all lynchings. But they're suspended from the ceiling so that it looks like they're hanging, which is, of course, an experiential part of the piece.
Yeah. And
there's a corollary piece that is being set up on the site where they were lynched on that slab. So, I mean, like, there was I don't know if, the Evangelical Covenant Church, Debbie Blue, what was it called? Sankofa Journey. Sankofa Journey was very powerful. So the Sankofa Journey, Alvin Bibbs from Willow Creek was doing something called the Justice Journey, very similar, I understand. I didn't do it. I did the Sankofa one. But you get paired cross-racial. You can't go with somebody of the same race. You have to, so I went with actually one of the young kids I represented. You get on a bus, you start in Chicago, you go like the Freedom Riders, you go down south to all these civil rights landmarks. You're watching documentaries and videos about the civil rights movement, and you're having guided conversation about race with people on this bus, all of various, very powerful, no dry eyes the whole time, very hard. But now it's like you're taking people out of their head, right? Yeah. And you're like giving them the experience of it changes. I think it helps people become more open. You know what I mean? Like living in North Lawndale's helped me become way more open to lots of things that I didn't think were true before. Because now I have people I love. Yeah. It's a different equation.
Yeah. It sounds like what you're saying is it's one thing to learn about these things in a sort of propositional, factual way. And it's another thing to get firsthand experience.
For sure.
To put names and start loving people concretely.
Yeah.
Keep thinking of diverse, right? Love your neighbors yourself.
Yep.
You need to know the neighborhood, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and we're so segregated around here that it's like,
Yeah.
to really get outside of your bubble does, like I would not be who I am today, or my faith wouldn't be what it'd be. I don't even know. I'd be unrecognizable to myself if I had not moved to North Lawndale, for sure.
Wow.
I mean, I would say it's as much of a change, if I can't say more, but it's as much of a change as my conversion.
Wow.
Oh,
So
yeah. Thank you. Those are some really great recommendations. So we'll try to put some links in the show notes and everything for our listeners.
The New Jim Crow too is also a good book. Michelle Alexander's book. That's a little older. Color of Fear. Well, there's a bunch, but anything where you're going to learn about the criminal justice system and be open to the idea that perhaps it isn't a vehicle of justice.
That's right. Yeah.
I mean, if you can't accept that, then you're going to have a hard time.
That's right.
Listening to anything I have to say, because I have oftentimes called it, instead of the criminal justice system, what do I say? Wait a second, I'm now botching it. Not the criminal justice system. I would always say the criminal system of injustice or whatever, because it's not helping.
Yeah.
It's not helping.
God's Law and Order as well. Aaron Griffith's new book. I don't know if you've come across that.
Oh, yeah.
I haven't.
Yeah.
No, I'll
good.
take it. Okay.
Yeah.
Who wrote it?
Aaron Griffith.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I would love to continue to learn, even just for me personally, but to continue to connect with our listeners. But we have just one more question.
Sure.
What concrete steps can churches take to benefit their own communities? So how can they do something like what y'all have done in Lawndale to benefit? I
will say it's tough. I get this question a lot, and the answers are tough because of, yes, you read some books, come open, all that, and that's great. But the challenge is that we are so segregated that the world in which we live and read this and then interpret it and apply it is still, for example, if I were out in Lake Zurich or where I've been most of my life, it'd still be predominantly white areas where it's just not, it's very hard to apply with just a kind of a head knowledge. So it's always tough because it's like, and then also you don't want to just like, people joke around like, you don't want to just go adopt a black friend, you know what I mean? Like, no, that's not what we're saying either. You know what I mean? Or, it's tough, but I do think getting outside of your world and building relationships with people who don't share your experience of our country or our local society or local communities, whatever you want to say, is really important. I think it's not just, and so, I mean, yes, a lot of churches have their peace and ministry groups, their, social justice Bible study groups, their Black Lives Matter, whatever groups, or, whatever kind of, the usual language of like, these are the people in this church that care about this. One, I would say like, let's not put it as a little pocket. It should be the whole church. Let's get that in the pulpit. Let's get that everywhere so that's just Sunday morning. But then, how do we get, I think the question that I would rephrase that question is, how do we get a segregated church to like live in community with each other? Because I feel like that gets us a long way if that authentic, real community of equality, listening, learning. And, yes, there's mutuality. It's not like I don't bring anything because I'm a white male, but like I've got to recognize I have a lot of handicaps. And it's not just race, it's gender too. I mean, it's like, we've got to own that. I mean, our country's not a shining light on race and gender equity at all. Right. I mean, not even close.
Yeah.
So.
Thank you so much, Cliff.
Yeah.
Appreciate that.
Yeah.
Well, that's just the foreword though. If you'd like to learn more about Cliff Nellis and the Lawndale Christian Legal Center, have a look at their website, which we'll link. They're always looking for willing hands to help in any capacity. So at this point, as we close, we want to thank our producer, Curtis Pierce, our graduate assistant, Lauren Januzik, and last but not least, those of you who are listening at home. So thank you so much. I'm Madison Pierce.
And I'm Fellipe de Vale. Thank you for joining us, Cliff, and thank you for listeners.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Foreword is a podcast hosted by faculty at Trinity Evangelical Divinity School. The views expressed by the hosts and guests of Foreword do not necessarily represent the views of Trinity Evangelical Divinity School. You can subscribe to our newest episode on your preferred podcast app or at forewordpodcast.com. Be sure to follow us on Twitter and Facebook at Foreword Podcast to get updates and additional links to content. Trinity Evangelical Divinity School is located 25 miles north of Chicago, with extension sites across the country and online. Trinity educates men and women to engage in God's redemptive work in the world by cultivating academic excellence, Christian faithfulness, and lifelong learning. You can find more information at teds.edu.